let's take a look at stuff. Let's take a look at our last few weeks of work. Of course, what I recommend you do, as always, is to download the repository, git clone fwd.git. Hopefully you understand how to use Git by this point. Otherwise, just go ahead and download the zip file from this page, www/fwd. All right, so class 19, where are we at? What have we done? Let's go ahead and open it up. Oh no, I just realized my installation of HARP might be broken, and I forgot to fix it before today. Also made worse by the fact that I just installed macOS Sierra, which came out today as a beta, so a lot of things might be broken. Anyway, let's see what happens. Do HARP server, are we broke? Oh, okay. Let's try installing HARP. Like I say in my instructions on this page right here. This is what I'm doing. Hopefully it works. Okay, this is the part where it tries to build Sass and it fails because the version of Sass that HARP uses is too old for El Capitan or Sierra. So,
You want to try playing around with the technology called Bourbon, developed by mockup, which does a similar thing that HARP does.
Does Bourbon have a built-in server?
I've never used it before, I think so.
Well, so Bourbon is not the same as HARP. Bourbon is a CSS and JavaScript framework. It has a bunch of different components. Yeah, so no, it's a completely different thing. Something that's a lot more similar to HARP would be either Middleman or Jekyll, which are both Ruby-based. But dang, I can't actually do any of this, and I'm kind of screwed. Okay, so I'm going to use this half-hour period to sort of set up my computer.
Actually,
yes?
I can open a port on my laptop. You can view the results from over here.
That's not going to help. I have to work on new stuff. I don't want to edit stuff on. Yeah, I'd much prefer not to do that. So yeah, no, I would like instead to set this up properly. Yeah, so is this going to actually happen for anyone else? Okay, yes, this will happen for other people if you have Node 6. So maybe my solution, my short-term solution for today is to install Node 5 where it won't have that problem. Great, simple enough. So I'm going to go ahead and download an older version of Node. Actually, this 445 LTS thing sounds fine. So I'm going to get the recommended for most users version. It's going to download real fast, and I'm going to install it. So yes, if this has happened for you, this is the reason why. I sent out an issue on HARP's GitHub, but I didn't get any response, which is worrying. So hopefully that'll work. Okay, so sure. Let's see what happens now. Node B, good. Older version, great. I love downgrading. Just kidding, I don't love doing that. But yeah, this will certainly fix my problem. We'll see. Don't want to say certainly. Nothing is certain except for death. Death. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so let's try that again. HARP server. Great. Okay, we're back in business. Excellent. Okay, so crisis averted. This is what we have. This is what we've got from last week. What we have is a fully built out mobile website. Of course, it looks a little silly at this resolution, but it looks a lot better if you open up the developer tools, dock them to the right as so. If you don't know how to dock them, you press this little ... in the upper right of Chrome's DevTools and choose the dock side, which is dock to the right. And here we go. Let's make this a little nicer. 320 is the minimum at which most people decide to develop mobile sites because 320 was the resolution of the iPhone 1. So you probably don't need to go below that unless you're supporting some sort of feature phone, like a Nokia from 2003, in which case it probably doesn't support most of the CSS you see here, so you don't have to worry about it. Anyway, yeah, 320 and above, that's good. Probably 320 to about 640 is a good size for mobile stuff. So I would probably say, and this is probably what we're going to do today, that at 640 and above, we're going to add media queries that make this look different. But anyway, so go ahead. Let's take a look at 320 or whatever. As you can see, pretty straightforward. It's got a whole bunch of silly copy that I wrote a long time ago. It's got our nice footer here, our header, or whatever. It's got this button that we spent a lot of time on because, man, this button has a lot of different classes on it. Yeah, so there's that. Interesting. Wait, WebKit linear gradient. I didn't add that. Wait, did I add that or did I not add that? Let's find out. Because if I didn't add that, that means that Harp is using auto prefixer built in, which is really cool if that's the case. Let's see here. So open recent, your class 9. Do assign style.css linear gradient. Oh, it's okay. So let me just see, auto prefix. Oh yeah, look at that. Okay, I actually didn't know that this was happening, but I think I might have mentioned this before, that auto prefixer is a really, really cool tool. Let's talk about that really quick. As you can see, in my CSS, I've got a background property twice. So why do I have a background property twice? One of them is crossed out. But if you look at the property that's crossed out here, it says, oops, here it is. It says WebKit linear gradient, and this says linear gradient. And you can see it's a little different. This says top, and this says to bottom. So how did that get generated? That was generated with a tool called auto prefixer, which I've shown before. Auto prefixer is pretty much a given. There's no reason not to use it to make it part of your tool chain. What it does is it takes fully built out CSS and prefixes any CSS properties that need prefixing. It uses values from caniuse.com, which is a very reliable site that tells you what percentage of browsers worldwide support certain features. So based on the browsers that only partially support features or support them using vendor prefixing, which is this sort of weird syntax where you see this -webkit- at the beginning, you know, you'll find out which ones support them, and if necessary, it will prefix your code. So the cool thing about Harp is that it does all of this pre-processing for you. It processes SAS, and then it runs it through auto prefixer for you, and then prints it right out. So that's just one really cool, straightforward thing that it does for you, and I'm happy to see this, even though you don't see it in my CSS, in my SCSS. Sorry. Yeah. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, we talked about linear gradient. We talked about using border. We got a semi-transparent border. We have a border radius. We have two box shadows separated by a comma here. We have, obviously, the text is color, displays inline block, which means that it's not going to stretch all the way across because it's just an inline block element and some padding on it. And that's what resulted in this nice looking button here. The assignment last week, if anyone did it, was about background images, about aligning them in different ways. And we're aligning background images in a bunch of interesting ways in this class, in this page. One thing that we're doing here is that we are making this H1 the same height and width as its background image, which means that the background image shows up only once within this container. And we're using a whole bunch of other rules, properties, overflow hidden, text indent 100%, white space no wrap, which all put together go ahead and hide the actual HTML-like content, the text that we see inside NoiseCo in the element on the right, but instead we just see an image on the left, the logo. So that's one cool way of using background images to sort of show in place of text. Another thing is we're using this nice picture of a terrible corporate cityscape, and you see the very center of the image because we're saying background URL images hero 50%, and we're saying that it's this hero here, and in addition we're saying, oh, 50%, right. 50% means that it is both vertically and horizontally centered. So that is to say the very center of the image is in the very center of the box. So you're not seeing the entire image. It's actually kind of being cropped on all four sides. But that's fine. Looks good enough. And we'll see more of that image once we start to make the page a little bit bigger. But yeah, there's that. We're using a background overlay. Well, not overlay, but it's really just a semi-transparent color, 25% opaque black, to overlay on top of this image to sort of darken it a little bit. Why don't we just go into Photoshop and darken the image using Photoshop? Because once we get to our desktop view, there's going to be some parts of the image that we want to show that's not going to be darkened. So we really want to do that via just CSS. Yeah, trying not to apply as many effects using Photoshop as much as you can is really great, because you can use CSS for that, and it makes your images a little bit more clean, more pristine, more usable in different contexts. Okay, and the last way that we're using background images, in an interesting way, is that here we have a background image, and it's this thing here. This doesn't really look like a background image, though, because it's sitting above the text, not behind the text, like a background would, right? But because this is the LI, and because the LI has so much padding, we've specified that we want our background to be at the very top center, 50% 0. That's basically saying center it horizontally and put it at the top vertically. And then no repeat, meaning that this image isn't going to tile. It's just going to be a single instance of it. And padding, when you pad out a box, it gets the same background property that the rest of the content does. So if you align the background at the top, it's going to sit at the top of the padding, not the top of the content, which is that blue area. So that's why we can use a background image and just place it up there. This now everything that I've talked about so far, other than the obvious like cloud background and everything, sounds a little weird, a little roundabout, and it sounds like a bunch of really weird ways of not putting the image tag inside the HTML file. Like, why don't we just do that? Why don't we just put image source agile.png instead of doing this whole weird background image sort of thing? The reason is because, as I've said in previous classes, we are trying to avoid using the image tag when the image provides no additional context on the page. That is to say, does the fact that we've got this little icon here above the heading Agile Workforce actually add anything, any sort of message, any sort of structure to the page? Is there any reason why, if you were reading, like, think of it this way, if you were reading this page out to somebody, would they benefit from you telling them, oh, and here's an icon of 2 speech balloons? If not, then that's probably CSS. If you're on a page otherwise where you're saying, oh, look, and here's a photo of said person that this article is talking about, then yes, you might want to convey that information because it might be very relevant to the rest of the page. But when you're loading up image files that amount to no more than just decoration on the page, you use CSS for that. And there are a whole bunch of different ways of doing that. And that's why we see this as a decoration, these clouds as a decoration, and NoiseCo itself as a decoration, which is meant to simply replace the text that is shown instead. You know, like it is important for you to say NoiseCo. That's the title. That's the heading of the page. That's the logo of the company or whatever. But it's not as important to say, oh, and the logo's right here. It's more important to say, oh, and this is the heading of the page, NoiseCo. So that's why instead of putting an image inside the H1, which is very possible, we are doing image replacement instead, which is sort of you know, doing things to text that you otherwise couldn't do in CSS. That's kind of one good way of thinking about using image replacement. By the way, if you can, other than in the case of using a logo, which actually has the words noise and co in the image itself, I would generally recommend trying not to put text into images and then loading them up on a site, because the more you do that, the less readable a page becomes, the less easy to modify the content the page becomes, and the more you have to put inside things like alt attribute or text that's hidden using weird CSS hacks. So the more text you can actually put into your HTML and style using CSS and cool ways, like this sign up now button, the better. Yeah, so stuff like that. Let me see here. I just want to make sure that I'm talking and microphone is on and no questions. Great. Okay. Oh, I can close this. Goodbye, iTunes. There we go. Where'd my stuff go? Here we are. Cool. Good. Any questions? Thoughts? Another thing I talked about, which was relevant to today's stuff, was that every single one of these sections has a div class container in it. I've said in previous classes that the reason that we're using this container is a little nebulous. There's not much of a reason for it. I mean, what you really could have done in this case is really just said that every main element on this page inside the body, header, nav, section, footer, etc., could have all been given the same sort of styling that would give it a padding left and right of whatever this padding is. That padding is the 40 on the left and 40. I'm sorry, that's not correct. There we go. 12 on the left, 12 on the right. This is new. I'm not sure what's going on here, but it's graying out padding as if the padding is being applied to this container, but it's not, because it's really just padding that's being applied to its parent details, which is why it's grayed out. It's saying this is not applying to the parent, the child, but it's very confusing, and I hope that they change this in a later version of Chrome. This is very new, yeah, but just try to imagine that the text is more grayed out than it actually is, because it's not being applied to the to the container inside it. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that if you wanted to simplify the HTML, you could at this point remove the div class container from inside each element and just apply this 12 pixel padding on the left and the right to every single one of them, and the document would render exactly the same. The reason that I'm doing this is because we are going to work on this. We're going to work on this today, going ahead and turn that into that. And as you can see, there is kind of this unspoken container here where all the text, all the stuff is aligned at this point, at this sort of like invisible line going down the page, and this invisible line going down the page. There's nothing over here other than background colors and images, and same here. So that must mean that there is some sort of internal container inside each section that is pushing it into the middle. There's nothing that we can say in terms of saying like, oh, well, let's apply automatic padding to the left and the right, which makes it stretch all the way across but only puts the content inward. That would actually be really cool if we could do that, but we can't. So that's why we have two divs, or two elements, main section thing and then div container inside it that amount to what we see here. Oh yeah, and why in the first place do we have padding on the left and the right? It's so at different resolutions we can be sure that the text is never going to touch against the very sides of the page. This is just a little bit of breathing room, which it would look really strange if it didn't. Like you see, look at the word webinar here. It almost looks like it goes off the side of the page, and you're wondering if you're missing anything because there is no longer any sort of cushion on the left and the right to do that. So that's why we had a little padding on the left and the right there. And that, of course, was part of the mockup annotations. We said, see this little lighter area on the left and the right. We said 12 pixel left-right body padding. Oh. Cool. What else is going on? I should mention, as I have a few times, and actually I already probably did at the beginning of this class, that there's a new series on July 11th, so tell your friends. That this will be Series 10 of front-end web development. That will mark my 5 years since I started teaching this class here, which is kind of cool. So tell people about it, because I want people to be here for that. Yeah. Because I'm teaching my third class on this mockup stuff, as I mentioned last week, that means that I only really have, I think, one more class. Let me see here. Wait, do I? Back end next week. Yeah, okay, never mind. Maybe I miscounted, or maybe I was thinking, oh, I'll leave the 27th off and take a 2-week vacation in between stuff. But obviously the 4th, there will be no class. But on the 20th, that is to say next week, I'm probably going to talk about the back end. Yep, and there's going to be stuff about installing Node and installing Ruby and installing PHP, and a whole bunch of really weird instructions. But stay tuned. Keep your eyes peeled to the. I lost all my English idioms. Just pay attention to the mailing list, because I'll be sending out a link to a VirtualBox installation file, basically a virtual machine file, which is a very big download. And I'd like you guys to set it up before coming to class. Or alternatively, I will be bringing a USB stick, and you'll probably be able to move it on your computer beforehand. But if you do get the email over the course of this week, then go ahead and please just install stuff, which will speed things up for setup for class. If you don't want to install a virtual machine that has a whole bunch of stuff installed on it, you can go ahead and follow these instructions the harder way. And although it looks like a lot of stuff, it's not too many steps, like 3 steps for Linux, 5 steps for OS 10, macOS, and then more steps for Windows. You're screwed if you're on Windows. Please use the virtual machine if you're on Windows. Yep, so there's that. Okay, I think we got 5 minutes until new stuff starts. Do we have any questions at this point? Any queries? No? Okay. Any questions from the floor? Anything else?
I just want to clarify something. So that when you were showing the full noise code web page, not in mobile mode,
yeah,
you didn't have 2 container columns on the side, right? You did or not? Because you're showing how things lined up really nicely.
Yeah.
That's just based on you setting margins and padding. Or this?
Just margins. Basically, what we're going to do is add a rule that makes those containers, makes the container have a max width of I think 960. 1 second. Yeah, here we go. So it's going to have a max width of 960. So we're just going to apply that rule to the container, and then we're going to apply a margin 0 auto, which centers it. You know, so that's how that's going to work. But yeah, so this is the annotations file we're going to work off of today. Yeah. If you want to load up this file in full, you go to jeffreyhw/noiseco. You go down to mockup wide annotations, and then click the raw button. Raw will just download the raw file, and then you can resume it. Yeah, so that is what we'll be working off of, the full size sort of thing here. I made this back in 2012. Wow, still using it. Still relevant, kind of. Well, now every page it looks like this is kind of made by Squarespace, but you know, yeah, cool. Favicon not loading. Oh, this is front end related. This is looking for a favicon or favicon, whatever you want to call it. A favicon is the little icon that shows up in the tab bar, like the little GitHub logo, or the little NoiseBridge logo, or the little Google Slides thing. If you don't have a favicon, then simply a little file thing shows up. What you do is that you put a file called favicon.ico, which is usually a PNG file with a renamed extension, in the root folder of your site. You basically, you know, if it looks like this, you don't put it in the images folder, you don't put it in the whatever else folder, you just put it in this folder here, your root directory, and your browser will look for it and try to load it up, and it'll put it up in that little thing there. The max dimensions of your favicon file must be 32 by 32. it's going to show up usually at 16 by 16, but for high DPI displays, Retina displays, whatever, it'll be sharper in that respect. So there's that. But there's also like 3x displays now, so I'm not sure if you want to do like 64 by 64 or whatever.
We had some roofing work done today.
Oh, cool. All right. Neat. Yeah, cool. Noise Bridge isn't falling apart yet.
There's
So
actually holes in the touring room. You can see the sun.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. There was during the winter there was nothing covering the skylight at all. Like there's this hole in the skylight there, and rain was coming.
Yeah.
So there was that.
Because there's this tar that we've used on the paints, but it's just like it's terrible stuff.
Yep. So, oh. Anyway, that's Noise Bridge. Cool. What else is going on?
Oh, I wanted to add in, there's
Yes.
also like fave icons. I don't really know the nitty gritty of it, but like on your mobiles and stuff, those
Yeah.
use a different resolution of fave icons. So fave icons are expanded into this crazy world and other generators that you can use.
So here's a let's see. Let's go to source and then public. So this is my lunch app, my app that my company uses to decide where to go to lunch. And in this folder, I have my fave icon, which is that little squeezy-looking L thing. And then I've got the Apple Touch icon, which is used for if you were to bookmark this on your home screen using Safari, then this is what it would look like with its corners rounded off. And then Tile and Tile Wide is used for Microsoft Live Tiles. If you use Windows 8 or 10's Metro interface or modern interface to open apps, this can be attached onto there, and it'll use this image or this image, depending on how big you make the tile, and just load that up. So that's how Windows does things. It also looks for those special things. So yeah, there's Apple Touch icon, Fave icon, and then these tile icons. Those are probably the most popular ones. Did I change this humans file? Oh, I totally didn't. Oh man, I need to do it. This is all wrong. A humans.txt file is something you'll also find next to your robots.txt file. Humans.txt is really just a credits file that you just say like who did it and what technologies you used. Whereas robots is basically rules for search engines telling them which parts of the page you can crawl. So this is all kind of front-endy stuff that you might want to throw into your public directory or your root directory that isn't processed using any sort of asset management or whatever like that. So yeah, there's that. Cool. So all right, I've talked about a whole bunch of assorted stuff. Let's move on to making our mockup responsive. Hi, this is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey. We are going to work on part 3 of our work off of our mockup, in which we will make it responsive and maybe make it a little cool and a CSS-y interactive-y drop-down, which will be kind of cool. Okay, so as usual, make sure that you have these files. If you came to the setup period, then obviously you already have them. If you don't, go ahead and download them. Excuse me. Go ahead and clone this repository. If you don't know how to do that, press the clone or download button and just download the zip file, or go ahead and download the repository. As usual, now I'd like you to, having downloaded this, make a copy of it in one of your own directories. Don't do what I'm about to do, which is copy class 19 and make a class 20 in the same place. But oh, whoops, that is not where I want it. What I'd like you to do is go ahead and just like maybe drag and drop class 19 somewhere else. Make a copy of it. Put it outside of this FWD folder and work on your own stuff in your own code folder. But what I'm doing is just creating a new one for today's class. So class 20, great. We got a big copy of stuff and we can continue onward. Let's go ahead and open up class 20 in our text editor of choice. I use Sublime Text, so let's go ahead and just open that up. Series 9, class 20. There we go. Cool. Great.
You might want to delete the assignment out of that folder.
Sure, yeah, you can do that. Let's do it. Assignment, assignment, assignment. Oh yeah, and solution. You can get rid of those 4 things. Anything called assignment and solution, we're gonna have there actually is no assignment for today's class because I didn't I've never taught a third week of this class before, and I don't feel like making an assignment. So there, good. So anyway, cool. Here's what remains of our actual website. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the folder that I just created. I recommend you do the same thing and run harp server. Cool. So let's go ahead and reload our local server, and here we are. Looks pretty silly at this resolution. What we'd like to do is turn it into this without all the red stuff. This is going to be the nice desktop version of our mobile site. Of course, you know, what I did was I followed modern standards, which are to go mobile first, make a nice mobile design, and then, if you want, go ahead and make it multi-column so it looks good on less ubiquitous wide displays like what I'm using right here. Of course, as I've said in previous classes, most people use the web on mobile devices nowadays. So you should be making a mobile website, then worry about making a desktop website. Cool, so let's get to it. So as you can tell, all the content is exactly the same. There is nothing that shows up here that doesn't show up here. So that's great. That means that we don't have to change our HTML at all. Pretty sure that we're not going to have to touch the HTML. Don't quote me on that. Actually, yeah, don't quote me on that because I'm wrong. There is one thing that we're going to have to change, and we'll get to that shortly. Wait, did we already do it or not? No, we didn't. Actually, yeah, this is too bad. This is something that I actually should have done previously because, like I said, we're mobile first. So here's one thing that we are going to do in our layout file. We're going to create a new meta tag that's got a, oh great, why am I forgetting it? Meta name, viewport, and content is going to be width equals device width. We've done this before. What this does is it instructs mobile devices to open up the site and not allow, treating the site as if its width, the width of the page, is equivalent to the width of your device's width. So that is to say, it's not going to start zoomed out like you might see on a whole bunch of other websites. Websites which aren't built for mobile will start out zoomed way out, and you'll have to, like, you know, pinch or double tap to zoom into the section of the page that you want. Whereas more mobile-oriented sites start out zoomed in 100% to the way that you'd expect it to be on a mobile site, and this is the rule that does that. It's basically sort of a little kind of signal to mobile browsers saying, hey, this is a new modern website which does actually respond to the different sorts of widths that are thrown at me, so don't do me the favor of zooming out, because we don't want to do that. In fact, you can go ahead and completely disable the behavior of allowing the person to zoom in and out of the page by adding another rule inside the content saying user scalable no, which is pretty straightforward. They just pinch and double tap and whatever, and nothing happens. So let me go ahead and open up a simulator and make sure that works. Yes?
Does that possibly make the response time better when someone does a single tap, because it's not going to wait for us?
Yes, that actually does, and that's a very new thing. As of iOS 9, and I'm not sure on Android. Actually, I think this is more of Chrome. Chrome is also doing this separately, so Chrome on iOS and Android. They've basically removed that tap response time if you see this here, because that is true. Double-clicking is not a thing that people do on the web. They only double-tap to be able to zoom in, and if there's nothing to zoom in on, there's no need for that delay. So very recently, you know, browser makers have decided to remove that little 350 millisecond delay between your tap and being able to see a response, which makes websites seem a lot more responsive, if you will, than they used to. So that's pretty cool. But yes, with this viewport tag, that's an added bonus that you get. So let's go ahead and load up some Sephora work. This thing here. As you can see, it is zoomed exactly to what? This is probably 320 across, or what is it? yeah, 320 across, right, with my iPhone 5S simulation. And if I double tap or try to pinch or whatever, nothing happens. So that's great. That was all done thanks to the viewport thing. By the way, if you're using macOS, you get Xcode, which comes with the simulator app. You can just open up Simulator, and it will give you a whole bunch of different iOS devices or tvOS devices that you can choose between, and you can see what your content looks like or your apps look like using this simulator. So really helpful. It's good stuff. Okay, great. So we've done that. That was what we should have done last week. But now let's continue on to making it work for more, traditional browsers. Okay, so first thing, I think I mentioned this during the recap a few times. We've got this container element that we've got inside each. Oops, that's ironic. You can double tap in desktop Chrome, and it still works. Or actually, no, it doesn't work because I just disabled it. That's very funny. Okay, whatever. Anyway, right. Every header, nav, section, footer on this page has a div class container somewhere inside it. Div class container, which currently does the only thing of sort of adding a little bit of padding on the left and the right. But we're going to add additional stuff to it that makes it, well, do what we expect. Now, you'd expect that you only really want this width restriction, which is going on in this mockup, to only happen on a desktop display. But interestingly enough, there's a very ubiquitous, well-used CSS property that sort of prevents us from having to write a lot of media query stuff, and it's called max width. Take a look. I'm going to go to this container, wherever it is here, and say max width is going to be 960 pixels. And, oh yeah, also margin 0 auto. So max width, as the name suggests, means that it will go up to a maximum of 960, but if whatever it's inside, which in this case is the page, is not 960 across, then it will simply shrink to whatever size it's given. There's also a min width, in case you want something to not shrink below a certain size, just give it a min width. But max width means that it'll grow and grow and grow until it can hit 960, at which point it stops expanding. So all of a sudden, check it out. Look at all this space on the left and on the right. It actually is very hard to even say that it's actually doing anything. In fact, is it? Hold on a second. Oh yeah, it is. Really hard to tell because currently everything is center aligned, so barely anything is actually hitting up against the border of the page. So not much is happening yet, but if I were to dock this on the bottom, which I think I will, we can see that now every container only goes yay wide. By the way, is this container really 960 by 73, or is it, oh, actually I take it back. Never mind. Oh, hold on a second. Okay, never mind. I was gonna say, yes, it is 960. I've talked about this in previous classes before, but in a lot of other things, in a lot of other projects, I use box sizing border box, a little rule that I put at the top of every CSS, every style sheet that says that if you are to apply padding or border to a box, that the width doesn't change, or that is to say, the border and the padding grow inward instead of pushing the box outward. Well, I haven't added that to the CSS file, which is actually good in the case of this container, because we want the, according to the annotations, we want things to stretch from 960 across. And this container is actually 984 across. Why is that? Because the content is 960, but the padding on the left and the right is 12 and 12. So 960 plus 24, 984. That's good, because that means the padding is outside instead of inside our width. So great. if I didn't want that to happen, then I would apply. If I did want box sizing, border box to be applied to the entire page, then I would apply a special rule to this container saying box sizing content box to just the container, which would sort of make it flip it back to its original property. Now I'm trying to remember if there's any reason why I shouldn't do that right now. Just to see, I'm going to add a new rule right here: box sizing. Oops, box sizing border box, and see if anything changes other than stuff. No, it looks like the rest of the page pretty much just works, even with box sizing defined. So I am going to do that. I am going to apply box sizing border box to the whole page, since it's a very good practice. It's sort of assumed nowadays that you add this to the top of your style sheet, because that's how better measurement works. But now that I've added this class here, this rule here, that applies to every element on the page, that's what that little wildcard means. Then I go down here to container, and I say box sizing content box, which undoes that just for the container. Which means that the padding is still going to sit outside of it instead of inside that content area. Okay, great. All good? Good. I mean, if I didn't want to do this, if I didn't want to undo it with content box, I could just make the max width 984 instead. You know, that would also work. Anyway, great. So now that we've done that, it is time to get down and dirty with aligning things to the left and to the right. We have graciously avoided having to align things to the left and the right in this page, except for this right here. This is the only instance in the entire page where we are aligning things horizontally. The welcome, my account, log out, everything else is just stacked vertically. So what are we using here to stack these things horizontally? This UL has a display of flex. I'm going to go ahead and say, as new web developers who are venturing out into the world, that it's much more important to learn how flex works, even though it's not a fully baked, it's fully baked, but it's not a fully embraced technology by all browsers just yet. It is a technology I recommend that you learn to use and start using right now, instead of the older technology known as just floating, which is what people used to use to align things to the left and the right. There are still reasons to use floats, but there's nothing on this page that really requires learning how to do it or having to deal with all the really weird inconsistencies of using floating. So let's go ahead and just use Flexbox instead. So as you can see on our mockup here, there's a lot of stuff that is aligned horizontally. Noise code's on the left, the login area stuff is on the right. These items are aligned horizontally. This text is aligned to the left, and this text is aligned to the right. These items are on the these icons are on the left. That's not really using Flexbox. That's just realigning the background, which we'll do. And then everything in the footer is aligned horizontally, and that'll be kind of interesting to see how all that lines up. But so yeah, this class, surprise, is really just kind of talking about Flexbox, because that's pretty much all that we're going to do. Okay, so let's start with the top. Inside our container, we have H1 and then UL. We want the H1 on the left and the UL on the right. Well, if we want these two to line up horizontally, then we need to go up one to the parent and make that the Flex container. Because the way that Flex works is that you got a container and you got items. The container is where you specify which direction you want all the children to go. So we say, hey, container, go ahead and make a flex direction of row, which means that it's going to go from left to right. And that's the default way that flex works. When you say display flex, then automatically, by default, containers start lining up horizontally. So let's do it. We don't want it to happen for all containers, though. So we're going to do it specifically for the header container. So this is going to happen inside, not this rule, but we're going to create a new rule just for the container inside header. Of course, this is a Sass-specific thing where we're able to write a new rule inside another rule. If you were to write this in plain CSS, it wouldn't work. So, remember, this is a Sass thing. So, container.
Do we have to put in a media query?
Yes, thank you for that. Otherwise, that would have broken our mobile site. Cool. Let's put that inside a media query. Okay, so we haven't even written any media queries on this page. So we want to determine at which point we want stuff to start to change. So we write media, only screen and max, I'm sorry, is it max width or min width? Min width 640 px. So here's a media query. I've shown this before in a previous class, but the way that media queries work is that you can start writing rules inside this little query here, and they only apply if your media is screen and if the window is at least 640 pixels wide. You can also do max width, by the way, if you want to flip this around. If you want to do a desktop first site instead of a mobile first site, you just put all these rules inside here and use max width instead, which means that your desktop stuff will be up there and your mobile stuff will be inside there. You know, not exactly just flipping it around. I mean, there's obviously a lot of rules that apply to both things, colors and font sizes and what have you. But either way, anything measurement-wise would be moved into this media query section. So these are rules that are going to apply in addition to stuff that applies outside of the media query, only if the screen is 640 pixels wide or above. Screen, as I mentioned before, is really just a keyword that means that this only applies for screen technology. That is to say, phone screens, desktop screens, projector screens, anything that's a screen. What isn't a screen? Printer pages. If you print something out using a literal printer that prints ink onto a page, like you do, that is print instead of screen. So you could create another media query for that. Or just load up an entirely separate style sheet using the media attribute on the link tag to load it up only for print. So that's cool. Okay, so let's start making some changes. Like you said, we're going to create the rule right here. Container display flex. Cool. Let's see that work. All right, that kind of almost barely works. Well, it did definitely align them left and right, but it doesn't do exactly what we want, right? But if we make the screen less than less than 640, all of a sudden they no longer align to the left and the right. Great. So that's what we want. That's great. Okay. So why is this where it is? Well, you can get a little bit of a hint of why it is where it is by taking a look at the orange area, the margin. There seems to be the same amount of margin to the left and the right of this noise code heading. Why is that? Because we say margin 0 auto. This is something that I didn't really know actually until you pointed it out, which is that automatic margin still works in a flexbox situation. Basically, if you give something automatic margin and it's a flex item, it will take up as much space as it can, both on the left and the right, just like margin auto does, but also allow for other items that follow after it to take up how much space they need to take up. So it's kind of weird. We don't want that to happen. We want this container, this heading to be all the way on the left and this list to be all the way on the right. So how do we fix that? We just get rid of the margin on the H1, which will sit that on the left. I'm going to go ahead and full screen this one and move this one into there so I don't have to keep going back and forth. Of course, that completely, no, I can't do that because it needs to be wide enough so we can see it, right? So never mind, I take that back. Okay. All right, well, what else? Oops, okay. Hopefully you don't get sick from my going back and forth and swinging back and forth. Cool, so great. H1's on the left, and unfortunately now the UL is on the left as well. How do we fix that? Well, as I've shown before, we've got the CSS tricks little cheat sheet, which disappeared. Oh, here we go. It's a very, very good resource. Tells you exactly how certain things work. And the rule that we're looking for in this case is justify content. Justify content says how flex items, how they proceed essentially in a flex direction. So we're looking for space between where the first item is all the way on the left and the last item is all the way on the right. And any center items will be evenly spaced out in between, but we only have 2 items, so it's only just going to be 1 and 2, left and right. So display flex, justify content, space between. There we go. Okay, and bam, there we go. Next problem is that this unordered list seems to be some weird arbitrary height. It looks like it's 43 pixels tall. Why is that? Oh, it's because this thing is 50 pixels tall, and this is 43 with a margin top of 7. So 7 plus 43 is 50. It looks like this unordered list on the right is trying to be the same height as that heading on the left. I think that's just the way that flex items work by default. It's that they, where is this? There we go. That items, by default, I think they stretch. What's the default? Yes, stretch is the default. So every flex item is going to stretch to the maximum height of the container, and the container is defined by the tallest flex item, unless you give it a height, in which case it'll stretch even further. But we don't want that to happen. Rather, we want them to be centered along the cross-axis. So, whatever. So let's do align. Is that align content? Yeah. No, align items. Align items center. And that will make it so they no longer stretch out, and now they are essentially centered. The only problem being that this unordered list still has a little bit of margin on the top. It has 0.5 m, that is to say half of 14. So that's what's pushing it down a little bit and not perfectly centering it. So let's undo that. Why was it doing that in the first place? Well, because we wanted to have a little bit of margin in between this and the logo, right? But we no longer care about that. So let's go ahead and undo that. So the UL inside the header no longer has any margin. If you want, you can combine these two things and say h1, comma, UL margin 0, whatever. Okay, great. Now it's nice, perfectly aligned, and we are done with the header. Great. Okay, next, let's move on to the nav. Unless anyone has any questions. No. Any questions from the peanut gallery? No. Okay, great. So let's see. Let's go on to nav. Nav is going to be pretty straightforward, pretty similar. We just take a look at which items we want to align horizontally, and then look for its container, which is the UL. So we're going to say that the nav UL is going to be display flex. And of course, we do this inside the media query. Nav UL display flex.
How are you doing that temperature-wise?
Huh?
How are you doing temperature-wise?
I'm doing okay. This actually is a good temperature. I'm okay actually. So thanks for asking. But if you're cold or whatever, you can close it. I'm okay either way. Okay, so they're all lined up, and that's okay. Of course, the obvious problem is that there's not any horizontal spacing between the items, so that's something that we can easily fix. But one benefit that we do get is that these items are just as tall as they need to be. According to our mock-up here, this section needs to be 36 pixels tall. And that just happens to coincide with the height of every one of these items here. You see how this says 36 as well? So it just so happens that the height of each one of these items, or that is to say the distance between this one and that one, is 36 pixels essentially. That's how high each one of these, how much each one of these takes. And we gave it a line height. That means that the entire area is just clickable. The area above it, the area below it, all brings you to contact us. And because we did it that way, we need to make no additional changes to get the the vertical height or centering changed at all. It just works. See, so this is exactly 36 tall because each A has a line height of 36. Perfect, great. Look at that hindsight or foresight. Great, next. We do need to provide a little bit of spacing on the left and the right for each one of these. So it looks like, according to the mockup, that there's 20 pixels on the left of this one and 40 pixels on the right of it. But that's obviously really just kind of a little tricky. It's really just saying that there's 20 pixels on the left and right of each item. Because as we know, both margin and padding do not stack or do not overflow each other for horizontal things. Do we want to use margin or padding? I would recommend using padding in this case. The reason being that when you add padding to a link, the clickable area becomes wider, just like if you were using line height for vertical. So by increasing the padding on the left and the right, it makes it so if you were to click in this area here, you would still click on home, which is probably what you want. So large targets, good stuff. Let's do that. So A, padding, 0, 20 px, right. 0 on the top and the bottom, and 20 on the left and the right. Should we have done nav ul lia? No, because there's only one usage of a inside the nav, and that is inside the li, inside the ul. So just nav a is good enough. There we go. Great. I tell you, doing this in Flexbox takes probably a quarter of the time that it took to do this in floating. So feel lucky. Feel lucky that you have better tools at your disposal for this sort of thing. Okay, next up. This is going to be a little more interesting. We've got the section class hero. So here's the biggest difference between the mobile and the desktop site. We've got this really big area here which has nothing in it. And it is a different shade of black than this. So that is to say there is no shade of black, whereas this is darker. So in other words, it really seems to us like we need to create a big, just open area above this slightly darker overlay and just have that appear. Can anyone think of a really easy, simple, straightforward way of doing that? Well, here's a little hint. This overlay is inside the hero, right? And the overlay is currently taking up the height of the overlay is what's determining the height of the hero. Is there other stuff that could also determine the height of the hero? Couldn't we add something to the hero to make it larger than whatever is inside the overlay? There's two things we could do. We could change the height of the hero. We could simply add a height of something. Or we could just add top padding to the hero, which would push the overlay down and reveal the nice blue sky without the dark overlay on top of it. I would recommend doing the latter. The former of adding a height would be okay. The only problem there is then that the hero overlay would sit at the top, not at the bottom. We could fix that by giving it a position of absolute and getting a bottom of 0 and whatever else, but that sounds a little too roundabout. I think it's a lot easier to just go ahead and say that the hero has a padding top of 350 pixels. Like it says, no, I'm sorry, that's not true. 220 pixels, that's it. 220 pixels right there, 130 pixels right there. So let's do it, 220. Okay, so the hero is gonna have a padding top of 220 pixels. Here you go. And Viola. So there's a little weird glitch going on right here. Anyone want to try to explain to me what's going on here? Is exactly 330 pixels tall. The problem, though, is that this is 220, sure, but this is more than what 130. which means that this whole thing is more than 350, which makes the background kind of repeat itself a little bit more. There's two things we could do. One is we could fix the height of the overlay, which is what we're going to do anyway. Another thing we could do is also apply a background size property to the background, which makes it stretch out. We can give it a background size of cover, which makes sure that the single background goes ahead and covers the entire space. That you have that it just stretches to as big as it needs to be to fully cover the box. But we don't want to do that. We can do that, but we don't have to do that. What we want to do is just go down to this little overlay section now and align them horizontally, which will solve the problem. Okay, so cool. Looking good so far. Let's go ahead. Oh, you know what? I just noticed something. This is the wrong font size. Did I miss this in the mockup, in the smaller mockup? Because I think this should also be 14. Yep, I was wrong. It should be 14. So here's something I missed on the Noise Coast site. These are too big. So let's go ahead and make these buttons a little smaller, both on mobile and on desktop. So we're going to do this outside of the media query. Go all the way up to the the nav? Yeah, the nav. And let's set the font size here to 14 pixels for the A. Does this property need to be here? Could it be inside nav instead? Sure, you could really put it inside the nav, the nav UL, the nav LI, or the nav A. But you know, since we've already got a whole bunch of properties here, we just might just make it all match up. Great, a little bit smaller there. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and align these guys to the left and the right. So, as usual, we just go ahead to inspect this and see what contains it. Looks like it's the container inside the hero that contains these two items which we want to align horizontally. By the way, you should notice that that this container is not a direct child of the hero. There's a little bit of a switcheroo happening where the container is inside the hero overlay instead of the container being directly inside the hero. Why is that? Well, as you can see, we want this hero overlay to stretch all the way across the screen. We talked about this in a previous class, I think. If it was inside the container, like let me go ahead and just, oh, I can't really do that. I can't drag it inside itself. First I have to drag the container outside and then put the hero overlay inside and pretend everything else is inside. You see how this overlay only stretches to the very edges here? That's because it's inside the container, which is only 960 across. So by putting the hero overlay directly inside the hero, it stretches all the way across. And then the container contains the stuff inside it, which will make it so it doesn't stretch outside that green boundary in the orange area. So that's why we've got the sort of stuff going the way we want. So looks like we want the hero container to be a flex container. So we say down here in our media query area, hero container display flex. And all right, not so great, but a good start. First thing is that this button is now much taller than it needs to be. Why is it that tall? Well, it looks like it just so happens that it is the same height as the H1. Why is that? It's because of that whole align items thing, right? Align items is stretched by default. We don't want them to be stretched. We want them to only be centered, which is I think what's going on here. Here, no, wrong one. Here, I should really just open this up in a new tab. Yep. So yeah, as you can see, this sign up now button is pretty much aligned with the very center of this text here. So let's say align items center. Okay, that didn't actually make the button any smaller, but yeah, okay. Next thing we want to do is justify content. Well, here's the problem about justify content. Justify content space between is what caused this noise code logo to be on the left, whereas the login is on the right. But here's the problem with these guys. Here's our container, and here's our H1, and then here's our A. These are pretty much sitting up against the edges already, because the H1, the content inside it, is making it stretch out such that it's taking up all the available space. So I don't think that justified content is going to change much. Maybe I'm wrong. Nope, doesn't change much because, like I said, they're still sitting along the left and the right edges. So we are going to want to do that eventually, but we don't want sign up now to go on to 2 lines. So how do we solve that? Well, the first problem, before I do that, and this is part of the solution. Before I do that, you might notice that this text is a little bit smaller than this text. This says 40 pixel font, whereas this is 30 pixel font. That's because the mockup annotations differ between mobile and desktop. That's fine. That's completely okay. So let's go ahead and say that for one thing, that the H1 inside the hero is going to have a font size of 40 pixels instead of 30. Good start. So great, it's bigger now. But there's still some problems wrong with this text here. Achieve synergy with crowdsource webinar solutions. This text says achieve synergy with space crowdsource webinar solutions. So it looks like this is on a new line. Even though there's definitely enough space here to say crowdsource, it breaks onto the next line. Why is that? Well, why is that? We need to, the mockup wants it this way, so we should probably do this in our design. So do we put a line break? Do we put a BR tag into our HTML? No, of course not. We never do that. We don't want to change our content to just match up with our design. Fortunately, we already have an element inside this this little H1 here that breaks this content onto the next, that is capable of, but currently does not, break the content onto the next line. As you can see here, we have inside our H1 the horrible words achieve synergy with, and the more horrible words crowdsource webinar solutions in a strong tag. The strong tag happens to make the text bold. But couldn't we add additional styling to this strong tag to make it do whatever we want? Don't we know of a property that makes it so any element breaks onto its own line? Do you know what that is? I'm sorry? Yeah, display block. If we just make it block, it'll just break onto its own line and not be in line, which is what strong elements are by default, with the text that's right behind it. So let's just say this. Of course, you know, all of these rules, H1 and strong and container and A and UL and everything, they're all making the assumption that there aren't multiple containers inside our hero, aren't multiple H1s, or aren't multiple strongs. If there were, then you'd want to start to add classes that differentiate them. But fortunately, we get to keep our selectors a little straightforward. Anyway, that seems to have done it. Now it's on its own line. The sign up now button is now not scrunched anymore because nothing inside this H1 makes it so it stretches too far. Of course, now there's a little bit, not enough space between the two things, so we can solve that. But another problem that we're seeing is this text is centered. It's centered within the H1. So that's pretty easy. We can just undo that, right? We're currently saying, I think, somewhere, that everything inside the hero is text-align centered. So we can undo that. We can undo that with the hero. We can undo that with the hero H1. We can really undo that wherever we want. I'm going to undo it in the same place that I'm doing it in the first place with the hero, just to make it kind of straightforward what I'm trying to undo. Like what I'm saying here is that this is the H1 is the only text that will be affected by me undoing the text-align center of the hero, but I might as well do it to the hero because that's specifically where I was doing it in the first place in the CSS. So just to make the code a little bit more understandable why I'm doing what I'm doing. So hero, text align left. Ta-da. Probably also do text align initial here. Is that correct? Let's find out. Yeah, you can. So text align initial is basically saying set it back to the default. You can use initial for font size, color, and pretty much any property, I think. You can have initial as a value, which basically sets it back to whatever it was before everything else above it kind of styled it to look different. So that's a good way of undoing certain stuff. But left makes it a little more explicit about what exactly we want. Okay? And then finally, I think all we have left to do is align this sign up now thing to the right, which we can do by justifying the content inside our container here as space between. So justify content, space between. All right. Things aren't perfect yet. It looks like, oh, I see what the problem is. This overlay is larger than it should be. The content plus the padding, that's 15 on the top and the bottom, and that's 112. What is that total? 15 plus 112 is 127, when it should really be, oh, 130. Hold on a second. If it's 130, no, I'm sorry, no, it's 142. Did I do this wrong? Oh, I totally did. Sorry, I only added 15 once. 15 on both sides plus 112 is 142, when it should really just be 130. What's probably causing that is this extra margin that I added onto the hero, H1, somewhere. Where did I add that? Ah, yes, here it is. Margin 0.5M. That margin is no longer necessary in desktop, which is what's making it sort of not aligned vertically. So let's get rid of it. H1 margin 0. And there you go. Now the hero overlay is 122 instead of 130. Do I really care about making it exactly 130? Let's keep it. Let's make it pixel perfect. Why not? So I don't know. Let's just increase the container's height to whatever it should be in addition to this padding here. So if we increase the height of this container, which is a flex container, it'll keep stuff inside it center aligned, which is exactly what we want. So currently it is 92 pixels tall. So what's let's see, what's 130 minus 15 minus 15, which is the current padding of the hero overlay? That's 100, right? So let's just make the container 100. Container height is 100 pixels. It's pretty easy. And there we go. Given that these things are align item center, no matter how tall we make this container, they will remain centered inside it, which is kind of great, right? So great. Okay, now that's pretty much pixel perfect with what we want. Great. Any questions? Let's skip on to the details. Okay, so details. Details look a little different. First thing that's most apparent is that the icons are on the left and the text is aligned to the left as well. So let's undo both of those things, or let's undo the text alignment. Looks like we say that details has text align center, so let's just undo that. Okay. One good thing about this design is that just like the mobile site, this text is only 75% width of the body, and we already set that in somewhere right here. We said that the UL has a width of 75, so perfect. That's We don't need to do anything additional there. Okay, but we do need to change the list item stuff right here, right? There shouldn't be this much padding on the top anymore, and this icon should actually be over there on the left. So what we can do is we can change the background positioning of every details item to make it so so it's no longer center top. It is now left top, kind of. Yeah, pretty much left top. So let's do that. Let's say that every details item, right? Every details item is going to be background position 0. 0, we'll pretty much put it in the upper left. It's a pretty straightforward way of doing it. If you could also say top left or left top, both of those work, or 0. So remember from last week we used this BEM syntax thing in SAS, which basically makes a rule of details __ item, just kind of adds onto it. Pretty cool. My syntax highlighter doesn't seem to like it, but don't worry about that. Oops. Highlighted the wrong, yeah, underlined the wrong thing. Okay, great. So, oh, you know what? That's not good enough. It's in a really weird location, obviously, but this confused me for a while. It's on the left, but it's actually vertically center aligned. How do I know that? It's because remember that the background area is comprised of both the green and the blue area, right? The padding and the content area. So that speech balloon thing is right there in the center. So background position 0 isn't doing it. I wonder if 0, 0 does it. Oh yes, 0, 0. That's it. This is really background position is one of the rules that in the 12 years that I've used it has continued to really befuddle me, because you can use both left and top and left interchangeably, whichever one you want. You can use 0, but it's different than 0, 0, which is both left and top, or both horizontal and vertical alignment. So I don't know what's going on. But anyway, 0, 0 means 0 from the left and 0 from the top. Okay, that's a little bit more like what we want. But the way it really should go is that these things should be to the left of the text, right? Not above it. Well, that's actually pretty easy. We just have to get rid of the top padding and make that left padding instead, right? That makes sense, right? No more top padding, and then just provide some left padding, and the background will just do its thing. It'll take up the padding on the left instead of the padding on the top, and it'll move it over to the left of the text. So again, I don't make any hard and fast rules about how much space there should be over here, but I'm going to say it's going to be the width of the icon plus 12 pixels right there. So that's fortunately the exact same amount of padding that we've been putting on the top, which is 60. Padding top has been 60. That's 48, which is the height of the icon, and then 12, which is just the additional space. So let's just make that padding left 60 instead. So details item is going to have a padding of 0, 0, 0, 60 px. So why don't we just say padding left 60 px? Well, we have to undo the padding top. So we could say padding left 60 px, padding top 0. But that's two properties. And why use two properties when we can use one property? This one padding property applies padding to all 4 sides. And it goes clockwise from the top. Top 0, right 0, bottom 0, left 60. There you go. Great. Okay. Do I have to do anything else? Let me see here. 40 pixels on the bottom, 40 pixels on the top. Is that what's going on here? I think so. Yeah, I'm about ready to say that that's exactly what we want, and that all the other stuff has already been done. So that took a lot less time than I thought it would. Great. Okay, now on to the footer. We're almost done. As you can see, the nav in the footer is already horizontally aligned. That's because the rules that we applied to the nav up here also apply to the nav down there. So that's pretty straightforward. So next thing we have to do is horizontally align the little logo, the nav, and the copyright. They all have to be on the same line. So how do we do that? As usual, just take a look at where these items are and what contains them. It just so happens that all of these are siblings of one another. So here's our container. Looks like we just have to make our container display flex, right? Which will just horizontally align them. So let's do that. Footer, container, display flex. Okay, where does that put us? Well, not perfect. Looks to me like each one of these items is stretching too tall. So that's something we can fix by doing align items center. Okay, still not perfectly aligned. That's probably because the nav has some margin top and the small doesn't. So let's get rid of the margin top from this nav here. Is that what's happening? Yes, right. Footer nav margin top 0.5 em. Let's undo that. So let's say footer nav has a margin of 0. Okay, almost there. It looks like this NoiseCo logo has that margin auto thing happening to it, right? So let's get rid of that margin auto thing, which will prevent it from centering itself and taking up all the space. It's an H2 inside the footer. Right? Okay. Now here's a problem. This is a hard problem, actually. All these things are aligned to the left, right? These things are stacked next to each other, right? So we know how to fix that, right? We can use justify content space between, which will make the H2 go to the left, the small go to the right. But what about the nav? The nav, this used to actually be a much harder problem before I learned about the auto margin thing. So never mind. It is actually kind of easy. I was going to say that NoiseCo and footer need to be sitting on the left with 40 pixels spacing them out. And then there needs to be an undefined amount of space between the nav and the copyright, the small. And the way I used to do that, the way I could only really think of doing that was by doing 2 flex containers. One flex container that aligns these 2 items to the left and that to the right, and then another flex container which just has these 2 sitting. Yes, right. One container contains that, and one container contains the whole thing. These on the left and on the right. So that's what I thought I had to do, sort of flex nesting, which is what you do sometimes. But then I realized that I could probably use that automatic margin thing, I think, just for the margin right of this nav. And let's see if that works. Or margin left of the small. I could do it either way. So let's say margin, since I've already got a margin rule on the nav, let's say margin is 0, auto, 0, 0. I've never written a property like this before. I've never applied auto to only one side. I usually apply it to 2 sides, left and right usually. But let's see if this works. Totally works. Awesome. Cool. So now we've got H2 nav with the rest of the space on that right being taken up by the nav, and then the small, which is all the way on the right. I don't think we even had to do justify content space between because this nav is taking up all remaining space. Yes?
If the auto is only working on one side, what is it now?
It's just taking up as much space as it can automatically. That's what auto means. Basically, like let's go to the mobile version of this page. This noise.co header has automatic margin on the left and the right. The margin on both sides is taking up as much space as it can, right? So now, since we've got a margin of auto on the nav, it's taking up as much space as it can, right? With leaving room as as the small needs and as much room as the H2 needs. That's the remaining space that the nav has. It just says, I'm going to take up automatic margin on the right. So this is sort of a new frontier, which is kind of come as a bonus, come like a little bonus feature to Flexbox. The fact that Flexbox allows you to align items in any which way, you can use automatic margin to space things out in that way. And so it's really cool that they kind of repurposed that. That's the way I see it, kind of repurposing a property for a new use in this case. Anyway, yeah, so there we go. We only need to do one or two more things. Noise.co, let's see, this needs 40 pixels on the left. It looks like there are currently only 20 pixels, I think. Yeah, 20 pixels. So let's give this nav actually a margin left of 20. 0, auto, 0, 20px. Great. Still just one property. So 0 on the top, auto on the right, 0 on the bottom, 20 on the left. Okay. And finally, the final thing is it looks like there is this black border in between each item, but only in the nav. Home, about, clients, testimonials, contact us. This black border right here. So it looks like there's 10 pixels on the left and the right of each one of those things. We've already done something like that, though. You see right here how there's this black border over here in this login area? Actually, that's a blue border. So it's pretty straightforward. I think all we really have to do, yeah. So the first thing we have to do is there's actually 40 pixels of margin in between these two things. There should really only be 20 pixels of margin according to this little measurement you see here. 10 and then 10 again, 10 and 10 again on either side of the border. So first let's reduce that. I'm simply going to make the padding of each one of these links to be 0, then 10, right? 0 on the top and the bottom, 10 on the left and the right, which means I have to increase this margin from 20 to 30 because it's going to be 30 margin plus 10 to the left of home, right? That's 40. So this becomes 30. Every A inside the nav becomes padding 0, 10px. Okay, they're a little bit more scrunched up, and that means that we should add a little bit of border between each one of them. So we can add border to the A's, but I think that I'd like to add border to the list items. I'm pretty sure that's what I did up here. Yeah, as you can see here, every list item has a border right of 1px solid navy. I didn't add it to the A because I don't want that separator to be clickable. I recently saw a site where when I was hovering over the nav items that had separators between them, when I hovered over the links, an underline appeared. But not only did the underline appear on the text, but it also appeared underneath the separator. Because the separator that they were using was not a border, it was actually a pipe character. And since it's a character that you can type into the keyboard, it can have an underline. So the pipe separator between each item had an underline, which was only when you hovered over it, which is really strange looking. So that's a bad way of doing it. Let's do it the right way, which is by adding a border right to the actual list item that contains the link. So nav, li, border right is 1 pixel, solid, black. I like to use this hex code instead of black because it's 1 character less than black. It saves you a character. And finally, all that we have left, there's that nice little border in between each one, is that we need to get rid of this border at the end of contact. I'm zooming in the wrong thing. At the end of contact us, right there. And that is done by saying last child border right 0. So ampersand colon last child means li last child, the last child in the list. And now the border is gone, and we're done. I'll be right back. I'm going to fill up on water, and then we're going to get to part 2. All right. Okay. So we're done with our mock up. As you can see, it's responsive. Let's check it out. This is sort of an intermediate resolution where this is, what is the screen right now? The screen is 938. Starts to get smaller. It actually starts to look a little weird at this point. And then that's the point at which it starts looking like that. You know, there's some stuff that we could fix here. We could make it so this sign up now button never wraps onto the next line. Actually, let's do that really quick. Let's make this sign up now button, make it so it's always a single line. Looks like this. Let's look for the styling here. Here it is, the A, right here on line 107, A, inside the hero. We're going to give it a white space of no wrap. White space no wrap means that word wrap doesn't happen. It stays on one line. And I think that'll do what we want, probably. So white space no wrap, and bam. Now it stays on one line, even if it doesn't have enough space to stay on one line. It's simply pushing this achieve synergy thing to the very left. You know, I mean, we could give this section instead of a height of, sorry, what is it? We could give this overlay, or is it the container inside it? Yes, there we go. We could give this container a min height of 100 px, which would actually cause this to happen. But you know what? I'm okay with that. Min height of 100. Well, I'm not okay with how this looks, but I changed height 100 to min height. Why did I want to change min height? Because this heading doesn't have any space to breathe. There's not a lot of space above it and below it in the overlay area. So I want to give it a min height. So if the overlay needs to stretch out vertically, it can. But then this thing happens. So how do I solve that problem? Well, I mentioned this earlier. I can give the hero a background size property. Check it out. I'm going to give the hero a background size of cover. Cover is a special keyword. There's cover, contain, and then you can also use percentages or other sorts of measurements or whatever to make it a specific size. But cover basically makes sure that all 4 corners of the box are filled with the background image. But the background image maintains its aspect ratio, which means that parts of the image are going to be cropped out. In this case, probably a little bit of the left and a little bit of the right are going to be cropped out as the container gets a little bit narrower. Right to that. Oh, sorry, I forgot to add min height. If you didn't do this in your CSS, go over to, oh, it's down here. Height. Change this to min height. Hero container min height 100 pixels. So There we go. As you can see, see how the background gets a little bit bigger? It's just trying to fill up the remaining space. And little bits of the left and the right of the background image are getting cropped. Now this has a different, actually I like this. You notice how there's more buildings showing up in mobile view than there used to be? There used to be just a little bit of background showing up, but now there's more. That's because background size is making it so the very top and the very bottom of the background are showing. Not necessarily the very left and the very right, but it has made everything a little bit smaller just to fit into the area and to cover the available space. In addition to cover, there's also another property that we don't want to use here called contain. Contain is definitely not what we want. You see how contain kind of repeats it 3 times? Well, what's happening here is that contain makes sure that the entire background image shows up at least once. So it shoves it into the container at such a size that it does not crop the background image. So that's what contain can do. Contain would be a really good use for something like noise co-up here. In case you wanted to change the height or the width and still make the background image show up completely, we would use contain here to make sure that it still takes up the different dimensions. Hopefully it's the same aspect ratio. Otherwise, it would probably tile. We'd want to set a background repeat of no repeat, etc., etc. So this would be a good use for contain, whereas this is definitely a good use for cover instead of contain. So there we are. Now it looks pretty good at tablet size. This could use some work. I don't care though. Yeah. I can. Oh, did it? Wait, you mean, oh, you're totally right, look at that. Okay, so the reason that this is happening is because NoiseCo, despite being given a width, does not have enough space. What happens with flex containers is that if things are squished up a little bit too much, they do something called shrinking, flex shrink. Flex items, flex shrink, if they simply do not have enough space to exist with all their siblings. Even though everything else is, trying to take as much space as it can, like it's still not having a good time. So I think the default flex shrink value is 1, which means that it will shrink along with every other container, every other item inside the container if it needs to. But you can set a flex shrink of 0, which will make sure that it most definitely does not shrink, which is what it's doing in this case. So good call. Let's go ahead and give this H1 a flex shrink of 0. This is inside the media query, right? Yeah. So make sure that it's, where did it go? Ah, here it is. No. What did I just add that to? Oh, wrong thing. Sorry. I added that to the hero H1. I should have added it to the footer H2 down here near the bottom. Flex shrink of 0. Can't type shrink. There we go. All right, so let's see that work. There you go. So flex shrink pretty much prioritizes its space. It squishes these things up a little bit more. Now the word rights is now on the new line because now small is a little bit smaller than it was otherwise. So yeah, that's how you can solve that problem. Yeah, so now this is very, very well, looks great at every resolution. As great of a designer as I am. Yep. So, ooh, I like how the buildings kind of zoom in and out of this thing right here. Anyway, there we go. A nice responsive thing. All we had to do was change CSS. I think we did 0 changes to the HTML at all to make this work. Yes.
Some of the other web pages, web browsers out there are going to be able to do the same type, right?
Every web browser from Internet Explorer 9 and above supports media queries. So every mobile device and every browser, every desktop computer that has completely not been living in a bunker for the past 10 years can support this. browsers that don't support media queries will have a design that looks a little bit more like this, which at the end of the day is not too bad. You know, it's still a very browsable website. It's just browsable as if you were on a phone instead of a desktop computer, right? A few years ago, I did that actually. Here's a cool site that I made. It'll take a second or two to load up since it's probably been dormant. Here's a cool site that I made for, waiting for it to load. Oh no, is it not going to load? Hold on a second. Let's try reloading it. Oh no, there should be a whole bunch of stuff that's loading up, but I think there might have been an error or something. Where? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me zoom out a little bit. There we go. Okay. There we go. Let's try that again. Here we go. So this is a little thing that none of that showed up because I used a media query to hide stuff at a certain resolution because things look too squished. So I just had to zoom out a little bit. But anyway, here's a little site that I made for our wedding from a few years ago. And it's really just me and my wife all drawn in different places, jumping up and down throughout the stuff, which is really cool. But of course, it doesn't look very good on a mobile display because there's way too much content. So I pretty much just, well, it pretty much just hid all of it. So it looks like that. On a mobile display, it looks like this, which is not very fun. But, you know, at least you can read the whole thing. And it's actually a lot of content. You know, on IE8, the site looks like this. The site looks like this because, for two reasons. One being that it doesn't support media queries, and this is a mobile-first website. And two, because if it did support media queries, and it did try to render all of the stuff that was happening here, with us jumping around and everything going all parallaxy and whatever, all this content moving up and down at one time, it would crash. IE8 is like thousands of times slower than this version of Chrome, and it simply would screech to a halt and not be able to render all this parallax stuff that's going up and down. A lot of these things in the background are semi-transparent PNGs that are actually very large in size, and there's a whole bunch of JavaScript determining the next position of each one of them. So it's far too complicated of a site for a browser like IE8. So this is essentially a case of graceful degradation, or progressive enhancement, whatever you want to call it, two sides of the same coin, where a browser that doesn't support it simply just doesn't see it out of the benefit that it doesn't support media queries. So there you go. Cool. So there's that.
They can handle PNGs in IE8.
Oh yeah. No, of course. They can handle semi-transparent PNGs, which is a new feature as of IE7. IE6 could not do that, so you had to have some sort of special polyfill JavaScript library to allow PNGs to load up semi-transparently on IE6, which was really stupid for a long time, where we had to use GIFs instead of PNGs. Yeah, bad stuff. Cool. Okay, so now it's time to sort of, well, you don't really see this much anymore because so many sites are really catered toward mobile displays. But I'm going to show you something cool that I used to do on this pretty often, which is adding a menu to adding a workable navigable menu to the top of this thing. So it's a little bit of a tangent. So let's talk about that. Before I continue, does anyone have a Mac charger that I could borrow, maybe, just for a little bit? Yeah, that would be really great if I could. Especially, yes, good. It is a more modern MagSafe 2 Mac. I just installed, like I said, Mac OS Sierra, which is a beta release. Thank you. It's actually very, very early beta, and I really shouldn't be using it for something like this. But I'm using it anyway, and it doesn't have very good battery life because it hasn't been optimized for consumer market yet. So I'm losing battery faster than usual. Thank you. Huh? No, I don't think they do. Well, not multiple versions of Mac OS. No, you can do multi-boot into Linux and Windows, but not Mac OS and Mac OS. Yeah, yeah. For the past decade, you've been able to boot into Windows on a Mac computer. No, it's not aftermarket. It's built-in Mac OS software. It's called Boot Camp. Yep.
Windows is not a danger to your disk as a result.
Nope. Windows definitely does not overwrite Mac OS. You can just multi-boot into it. It works pretty seamlessly. It's worked like that for a long time. The only downside is that there aren't the best Windows drivers for Mac hardware, but it still works fine. You can play 3D games. You can play whatever you want. It can be a Windows machine. It's all the same hardware inside, you know. Cool. So let's do it. Let us make an interactive menu. First thing we have to do with a menu is obviously add the menu items, and that's done using HTML. So we currently have a single menu of 5 items. What I want to do is I want to make it so when you mouse over home or about or clients or whatever, that a little menu drops down with additional items. Like with about, I want to say like learn about our history, our location, our or our members, whatever, something like that. So how do we do that? How do we write that out in HTML? Well, this is an unordered list, and you know that you can have a sublist. You can put yet another UL inside an LI. So it can go like UL, LI, UL, LI. Starts getting a little nesty, whatever, but let's do it. UL, LI. Cool. So this is a UL, which is a sibling to this A, which is inside the LI. Pretty straightforward. And it currently looks terrible. It's actually, I mean, you can kind of see what's going on here. These 3 items are kind of centered underneath this about thing, which is kind of cool, but not exactly what we want. We obviously don't want it to show up by default. By the way, this is something that we should probably do within the media query section. Well, there's certain stuff we need to do outside. Like, for example, we don't want this to happen. This is way too big of a menu to show up in, you know, like on a mobile display before you actually get to the real content. And we don't really care about that sub-items. Those sub-items, they're optional. We can really just go to them. This is actually one of those little cases in which your mobile experience might not exactly match your desktop experience because certain stuff might not be accessible because there's no such thing as hovering, you know, moving a cursor over an item on a mobile display because there's no such thing as cursors, right? So anyway, let's go ahead and change this around. First thing that we're going to do is add a rule up here outside of the media query saying that UL is going to be display none. But not just any UL. A UL inside an LI is going to be display none. So regular ULs display flex, good times. But the ULs inside them are going to be display none. Right? So nesting is important here. LI, UL. And it didn't work. Why is that? Did I not save? It doesn't seem to have applied. Oh, that's because I'm dumb and I put it inside the header LI and not the nav LI. So let's go down to nav UL. Oh, I don't even seem to have a rule for nav LI, so I can just say nav UL. That works, right? Because it is a UL inside a UL. It's inside an LI, but it's also inside the UL, right? So either one works. Great, and we're back to where we started. Cool? Next, now this is the interesting part. How do we make it such that the list item shows up? What do we want to hover over that causes the UL to show up? Well, we want to hover over the A, right? Yeah, we kind of do. So here's a sort of weird, this isn't hacky, but it's a weird CSS 2.1-ish, 3-ish way of doing things, which is actually kind of new, and I only learned how to do this relatively recently. It looks like this. So, plus, huh? That's weird. What does plus mean? We've seen bracket, which means directly inside, and we've seen just nothing, which means somewhere inside. But this is plus. What does plus mean? It means adjacent to, immediately following, sibling, direct sibling, next sibling of. So we're basically saying that if you hover over an A, then its following sibling UL will have a display of block. That's actually pretty cool. It's cool, and it works. I mean, we have to fix some other stuff, and it works. But here's the problem. I hover over about, and then I hover over about. I can't hover over anything underneath it. It all goes away. Why is that? Any thoughts?
Because I
was going to say, because the rule doesn't apply to the unit underneath it. So as soon as you stop hovering over the A.
That's exactly it. That's right. As soon as you stop hovering over the A, then the UL disappears. So when you're hovering over the UL, you're no longer hovering over the A. So what can we do about that? How do we make it? Yes?
Apply the rule to itself.
Apply the rule to the UL?
Yes, more cursor.
So you mean hover UL and also UL hover display block like that?
Something like that.
Let's see what happens. About our, oh yeah, okay, that works. That works.
Does that intercept any kind of eat up memory or cursor memory?
It doesn't, no, it's not a problem with memory. It's a problem of ugly CSS. The fact that you have to add a hover, you have to add a display block in both cases. I'm actually surprised that this worked in the first place. It actually only works because there's no gap in between the A and the U. Because immediately when you're done hovering over the A, now you're hovering over the UL. I would actually say that I'm not sure if this works in every browser, because other browsers might go like, oh well, you're out of the A first, so we're going to undo that property. Now we're going to apply the next property. Instead of saying, oh, well, now you're hovering over the UL, we're going to undo the A after, you know, like, right? So that order of operations could differ. I don't know if there's anything in the spec that says specifically how that should work. So this, to me, is brittle. Let's think of a much better solution. It looks like this. Instead of using this plus selector, which has its uses, but we should not use here, why don't we just do this? Instead of A hover, we do li hover. So the li contains the A and the UL, right? So if you're hovering over the A, aren't you hovering over the li? Right? Because the A is inside the li. And so if you're hovering over the A, you're hovering over the UL, the li. If you're hovering over the UL, you're hovering over the list item that contains it. That's a weird tongue twister. Yes, you are, right? So check it out. It works. If you're hovering over here, you're hovering over the list item. If you hover over here, the UL, you're still inside the list item, right? So that's why it works. So it's a lot more straightforward. So next thing is we don't want the entire header to do this when this is terrible. We don't want that to happen. So we don't want this UL to stretch out the nav. We don't want this UL to stretch out the contents above it. We don't want this UL to push the rest of the page down. we basically just don't want this UL to affect the placement of anything else on the page. Does that sound familiar? Huh?
Layers.
Layers in which way? What do you mean? Is there like a layer property in CSS? Exactly, and how do we do that? You're very close. I think you got the right idea. We want to have it hovering on top of the page. We want to make it essentially an overlay on top of the page that doesn't affect the placement of anything else on the page. Anyone remember how to do that?
Would you use position absolute?
Yes, we would use position absolute. Position absolute makes an element not affect the placement of anything else on the page. It acts as if it's just hovering over nothing. It's just, you know, not affecting the placement of anything else. As an added bonus, when you add a position of absolute to something, it still shows up where it would have been had it not had a position of absolute. So that is to say that it should show up pretty much right there. Let's try it out. Li hover ul display block. I'm going to add it here instead of there. I don't like adding more rules than I need to a hover selector. I'd much prefer to add it to something like this. Even though it has a display none, I want to make those rules apply even if you can't see it. So let's just do it here. I mean, I know it's silly, but let's do it anyway here. So display none and position absolute. Look at that. Looks better. Obviously needs a background, but that's pretty close to what we want. By the way, you might have noticed that these list items don't stack horizontally, even though I had a rule that said that list items are inside this display flex container. So why don't these list items align horizontally? It's because I said that when you hover over an li, that the UL inside it becomes display block, not display flex. If I said display flex instead of display block, then this would happen, which is not bad, but it's not what I want. I want these things to stack on top of one another, so I'm going to say display block instead. Okay. Next, I am going to say give these a background. So that's pretty straightforward. The UL has a background of navy. There you go. And finally, I'll just give these things a text-align of left. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? There must be something else inside it. That's okay. So I'm trying to find out why these things are display left, but every time I move my mouse over here, it disappears, right? I want it to stay open. So how do I do that? Well, something pretty cool. I can highlight this in my elements panel over here on the left. And then I click this :hov button that says toggle element state. Click it, and then I can force element state of hover. And now it's forced. See that little yellow dot there? That's just basically saying that I have like kind of push pinned in the hover state, and it's going to stay like that, even though I'm not hovering over it. So now I can go ahead and inspect this. And it looks like, even though I've given every UL a text-align of left, text-align WebKit match parent. It looks like I've given every nav A a text-align of center. Okay, so let's do this instead. I'm saying nav ul A will have a text-align of left, right? And A inside a UL inside another UL will have a text-align of left. There we go. Better. Finally, final bit for tonight is I want to have a sub list. I want to have a third depth list. I want to hover over our clean bathrooms and learn about both of them. So what is that going to look like? I want it to drop out to the side and drop down. You know, so like this, right? So let's do that. The markup is pretty straightforward, the exact same way we did it before. UL, LI, cool. Like Key West, but it's bathroom west instead. Cool. So let's start out and see what this looks like. It's going to be a little weird. So first of all, markup's pretty straightforward. UL inside this LI, just like that. So now we've got nav, UL, LI, UL, LI, UL, LI. Kind of crazy. So right now, it looks like bathroom west and east show up immediately, right? Because our rule says that any list item, any unordered list inside a hovered list item shows up. So it looks like we don't want that. So I'm going to say here that nav UL UL, I'm going to say li hover UL display block, but UL inside that still has a display of none. Okay. But then I can say that if you hover over that LI, that a UL inside that will have a display of block. So I'm sort of undoing and redoing and undoing and redoing a thing over and over and over. Display block, display none, display block, display none. Kind of silly, but I think it'll work. About our clean bathrooms. Great. Next thing that I want to do is I want to position it to the right instead of underneath it. So how do we do that? Well, think of it, yes.
I don't want to have it just, sometimes when you get a secondary or tertiary menu,
yeah,
they show up where there's space available and not just in one direction. So it wouldn't do that.
Not really, not easily. No, I think that requires JavaScript for positioning and determining how much space remains or something. I really just want to show it to the right. Yeah.
Even just having a drop down, a select menu is what my go-to would be for displaying that. Just so if you bump up against the arm on the screen, but there's space above, the select menu does have a built-in contraption to figure out.
Yeah. Yes, there are drop downs that use JavaScript to determine if they have enough room to show up at the bottom of the screen, and if they don't, they show up above the target. So that's cool. Anyway, we want to move this to the right. So currently, based on absolute positioning, this bathroom west, bathroom east shows up where it does because that's where it would have been had it not been absolute. It would have been stacked directly underneath our clean bathrooms. But because it's position absolute, that means we can move it anywhere. More importantly, we can move it relative to something, right? And so what do we want to move it relative to? We want to move it relative to our clean bathrooms, right? We want it to be to the right of that, but not underneath that. We want it to be to the left of it, starting about at the same top as our clean bathrooms does. So all we have to do is make that list item position relative, right? If we make it position relative, then we can align one of its children relative to certain points, certain edges, certain corners that it has. So let's start with that. Let's say that this can actually be really straightforward. We can just say li position relative. We don't have to care about The li inside the li inside the li being position relative. Don't worry about all that. I could put it here if I wanted to, but I don't care. I've already lost track of what's inside what. But I do want this to, this is the one, actually I'm sorry. Nav ul. No, yeah, whatever. Let's just do it here. It doesn't matter. I could do it up here without the hover state or whatever, but I'm just going to say that this ul inside the other ul inside the other ul is what's going to be positioned to the top, and that's going to be the top of whatever it's relatively positioned to, which is its parent list item, right? I'm sorry, position top. I'm totally top 0. Sorry, not position top. Position is absolute. Sorry, yeah. So that kind of isn't what we want, right? But we want to move it to the left of it. So what do? Do we say right 0? Do we say left 0? Or either of those going to work? If we say right 0, then it's going to align its right edge to the right edge of its container. If we say left 0, it's going to align its left edge to the left edge of its container. Both of those are going to result in pretty much exactly what we see here, right? Because bathroom west, bathroom east are aligned along the left edge and the right edge of its container, our clean bathrooms, right? So how do we move it all the way to the left? The answer is left 100%. 100% corresponds to the width of its parent. So if you say 100%, that means it is 100% the width of its parent away from its left edge. And there you go. Check it out. Let's make this a little bit wider. So I actually don't know why this is breaking onto 2 lines here.
That happened when we did relative.
Huh?
That happened when we did relative.
Really?
So is it relative to
It's relative to its parent list item, because every list item now has a position of relative. So I don't know why position relative caused that to happen. That's very strange to me. That said, I know a way to fix that, which is pretty much the same way we fix sign up now, which is to make every list item have a white space of no wrap, which is probably going to screw up this bottom footer at one point. Oh no, that's fine. It just makes this copyright look all scrunched up, because now contact us, whatever else, it's not gonna break onto 2 lines. But neither is this, and that's what we want. We want those to stretch all the way across and not wrap on the next line. Yeah.
How many estates is one of the two? Or however they're
Infinite listings. Infinite, you could go forever. In fact, I'm pretty sure that with 0 effort, I could do a 3rd one. Well, maybe. I'm not sure. I'd probably need to set up another like li hover ul something else, you know. And then, you know, but either way, you know, you could just keep going in your CSS, and you could even do a cool Sass function that does like a recursive kind of, you know, nesting thing. Sass actually has functions that can call themselves. It is a kind of a Turing-complete language, which is a little strange. Anyway, yeah, so you could do that. You could print that out in your Sass, and you could just have it so it's menu, 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 menu forever. Of course, you probably don't want to do that. One downside of this approach, this CSS-only approach, is that let's say that you want to go straight from about to our clean bathrooms. And oh, wait, sorry. Let's try that again. See how that's a little brittle? Because the second you leave, not the second, but the instant you leave that menu, the instant your mouse goes outside of it, the menu closes. That's not exactly user-friendly. And if you take a look at something like this, you'll notice that there's actually a little bit of a delay before these even appear. And when I move my mouse outside of it and I go back in, you see how it's still there? That can only be done with JavaScript. That sort of delay and that sort of waiting until it actually, like, you're no longer quote unquote hovering over it, that must be done with JavaScript. There's certain stuff that you simply can't do with CSS, having to deal with your state, like retaining the state of what you're doing in your application. So that's where JavaScript interaction comes in. So there are libraries like jQuery UI and other ones that provide this sort of drop-down behavior. I think Bootstrap might have something built in. It's the drop-down in Bootstrap that does a similar thing. And you can tweak those delays for when they show up or how long it takes until they disappear and whatever else. But anyway, this is a CSS-only way of doing it, which is kind of neat, worth learning about. Finally, let's make this not happen. Even though, of course, on a mobile device, there's no such thing as hovering. Let's just make it so this whole thing, li hover, ul display block, blah, 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 all this is going to go into the li rule for nav all the way inside the media query, which is right here. There. Li hover ul, li blah, 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 blah. I just moved it all the way into the media query section. Yep, so now it's not doing that anymore. But it will do that at the proper resolution. Ta-da! Okay, we're done. Hooray! Site is done. Site is done. Site is over. If you're using Harp, this is now the point at which you can build it. You can Control-C out of Harp. You can say Harp compile. And now there's a www folder which has index.html and style.css. And this is the compiled, final, non-Sass, non-EJS, non-whatever else version of the final HTML and CSS. You can go ahead and drag and drop this www folder onto whatever static file store you feel like. S3, GitHub Pages, your own traditional web host, wherever you want, it'll show up, it'll work perfectly. So that's what Harp lets you do. It's just plain old HTML and CSS. You just double click on index.html and bam, ta-da. It's the full site, not loading off of the server anymore. So, hooray, Harp. Cool. So, thanks for coming. Thanks for staying a little late. Well, not too late, you know, because it usually goes long. Okay, so next week again is the back end stuff. I'm going to give out a virtual machine that is set up to run Node, set up Rails, and to run PHP. You can set up your machine to do that. The steps aren't really that hard, and maybe it'll make your machine more of a development machine. But if you don't feel like going through the whole thing, or you do feel like following along exactly with every single thing that I do on my screen, then maybe the virtual machine will help you out. I'll give instructions on how to do that shortly, well, over the weekend maybe. Anyway, look for that. So thanks for coming. There will be a lab. Oh no, I'm sorry. There will not be a lab this week, and there will not be an assignment this week because I'm out running a half marathon. Cool, in Portland. It's called the Grateful Dad Marathon because it's Father's Day, which is hilarious. Anyway, so I won't be here on Thursday. I'll be back on Monday of next week for the backend thing, and that will be the second to last class. The final class will be that HTML class where I just talk about every single element and what it does. So cool. Thanks for coming. Any final questions? Anything else? No? No? Okay, cool. See you next week. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.